The story of our today's manga begins in a small flea market called Old Man Yang's shop, in which the service of the next client is already in full swing. A suspicious purple rash, similar to growing mold, on the visitor's hand attracts the attention of the junk dealer because it's not every day that you see such an infection. However, a young man with an extremely thin build is clearly not going to talk about all sorts of extraneous topics just to quickly get money for his old mobile phone. Buyer Yang quickly examines the gadget and, assessing its quality and generally unpresentable appearance, puts its price at about 300 yen. However, the visitor is clearly not happy with this price and immediately tries to increase it to at least 2,000, citing the fact that this mobile phone has allegedly never been used, but the seller clearly has a different opinion on this matter. When old Yan takes on the task of checking the internal data from the previous owner, the visitor is frightened and tries to stop him, not allowing him to see what is hidden in the device's memory. But Ian intercepts the visitor's skinny hand, making a caustic joke about his dirty dealings with his tame chick. Not intending to listen to the fat man's mockery any longer, the young man, gritting his teeth, nevertheless agrees to a modest sum for the mobile phone, and the flea dealer nevertheless accepts the phone, giving the promised 300 yens for it. On the way out, he meets another young man, whom they almost collide with in the doorway. The guy turns around slightly, looking at the departing visitor with a curious or even slightly contemptuous look. But he came here for a reason, not to look at the people coming or to buy some old temple for himself. No, obviously he had a slightly different goal. Entering the local equivalent of a pawn shop, he directly addresses old Ian, reminding him of their recent agreement by phone. The junk dealer, not wanting to enter into a dispute with his brother over the deal, immediately sets about searching for a suitable product among the rest of the junk on the table and on the shelves of his retro collection. While the man is still digging through his pseudo-product, telling his stories along the way, Yelan, that's the name of our main character, draws attention to the device lying on the counter. He picks up a fairly worn, but at the same time even more or less neat-looking phone and carefully examines its body, power buttons, and screen interface. On a clean, smooth, chip-free screen, the young man sees 31% of the battery charge against the backdrop of personalized wallpaper and interface elements. It looks like he was treated quite carefully. Old Yan finally finds something suitable from his assortment, but his buyer has already had his eye on the item he is interested in. But this does not mean that the deal will not take place. The seller notices this, and according to the old traditions of the merchant Morshu from The Legend of Zelda, he decides to use the circumstance to his advantage. Stealthily approaching Yelan from behind, he offers him to give him this mobile phone practically for free, without even increasing the price, as is usually the case. Without thinking twice, the guy agrees, taking the gadget for himself and immediately turning on data transfer to reconfigure the device for the new owner. Meanwhile, the former owner of this gadget was already moving away from Ian's shop, walking through the narrow streets of the town, but at the same time his thoughts were occupied with only one thing. He is still tormented by the question of the appearance of this strange purple rash on one of his hands, from whom he could have picked up this infection. He has no idea. This has never happened to him before.
Apart from the rash itself, practically nothing bothered the man. Everything was as usual, although there was some heaviness and retardation felt in his movements, as if his legs were tangling by themselves, stumbling over invisible stones.
Suddenly, our infected person stops in the middle of the street, right in front of another shop, Master Lu's clinic. In such areas, such eateries often appear like in a huge market, but in the current circumstances, this is just the thing. Coming closer to the advertisement attached to the hangar door, he learns that this clinic has moved to another location. Of course, he could contact the number indicated there. But apart from a number of illegible symbols and in the absence of a mobile phone, the situation is no better. Out of disappointment and the loss of his opportunity, our patient kicks the door with all his might, venting his anger, which is why a dull clink of metal rushes down the empty street. And right there, as if at the snap of a finger, while our man was shouting at the door like Showspeed on one of his regular streams behind him, as if out of thin air, the figure of Master Lu appeared. His appearance takes our patient by surprise, but the old man immediately, understanding what the matter is, invites his potential patient to undergo a short examination. The client and his doctor enter a small room of the pharmacy clinic. It turns out that old Liu was forced to return here because he mistakenly left some necessary things. Who would have thought that everything would turn out so well? The doctor begins his examination with several questions about complaints, to which his patient immediately talks about a strange purple rash that has been bothering him for several weeks now. Master Liu takes a closer look at this rash, examining every part of it. In appearance, it looked like something between a crust from a third-degree burn and some kind of transverse lichen. as if acid mixed with the elixir from Clash had been spilled on his hand of clans. He continues to examine the affected area, simultaneously feeling the limb. Based on his observations from the internet, he suggests that it is purple eczema, but in response to this, there is only silence. Upon examination, it turns out that this rash only continues to spread across the arm, like mold on an old piece of bread, which greatly puzzles Master Liu. The patient immediately after the interview asks whether it is possible to cure, but once again the answer is only eerie silence. It seems the situation is much more complicated than it might seem at first glance. He again asks the question what kind of infection this could be, but the old man in response only advises the young man to look about it on the internet. Maybe he will find more answers there, after which the doctor finishes the examination. Approaching one of the almost empty medical cabinets, Liu realizes that there are no needles, no necessary medicines that could help the guy. Unfortunately, now he will not be able to cure him. At some point, the patient tries to somehow catch words with the master, just to somehow try to demand treatment for himself. But the old man just ignores him. It's already starting to get dark outside, and the doctor is leaving his former place of work. It looks like now our patient will have to be treated independently via the internet, some kind of life situation. He returns to his modest home, lying in bed with his nose buried in the screen of his new gadget, scouring the internet for information about his illness and ways to heal it. The rash, like a malignant tumor, continues to spread across his body, almost covering his entire right arm right up to the elbow. It seems that it is only getting larger with each passing minute. Attempts to register at a public hospital turn out to be difficult due to stupid registration difficulties such as telephone data, and the new phone made this problem even a little more complicated. After all, having reached one of the doctors at the state clinic, our hero receives an answer that his problem may be purpura disease, an accumulation of blood under the skin, like a bruise. But the infection itself can be treated with a needle. He immediately remembers that old man Liu said something about a needle and some medicines, which at that moment were not in his shop. Lately, this character of ours has not been particularly lucky, but this will not last long. Jumping up from his bed, the guy immediately looks into a nearby chest of drawers looking for the necessary needle. Who would have thought that such a trifle could be needed so urgently? After a few seconds, he finds the sewing needle he needs. It looks like the day is finally starting to look good. Having turned on the gas stove, the young man immediately begins to prepare it for the treatment process, heating the sharp end of the needle until red. Now only this needle is his last chance to get rid of this infection, so apparently his sewing skills will finally come in handy, albeit not for their intended purpose. But nevertheless, he begins to actively scrape off this purple crust with a hot needle, gradually clearing the affected area, despite the burning pain from the hot metal. This method really helps, and now all the worries are behind us. Who could have known that such an infection, terrible at first glance, could turn out to be such a trifle? Or so it began to seem. The guy continues to gradually cleanse the infected skin. Now his movements are not as tense as before. He had to worry all day just because of such nonsense, but in the future he should be more careful. In the end, having completely scraped off this rash like rust from an old frying pan and thoroughly wiped everything with napkins, only a dull bruise remains on the problem area. More like a birthmark. But this is a good reason to get a big tattoo. Finally, we can relax, our former patient thought, falling into his bed, finally calmly starting to sleep. However, falling into sleep is interrupted by a sharp pain near his left ear, which the young man immediately grabs as if not wanting to listen to the noise of his neighbors. Fortunately, the cause of the pain turns out to be just an accidental broken earring. It looks like someone will have to say goodbye to the detail of their style for a while. Without thinking about this, our alarmist easily throws this little thing into the trash bin. There is clearly enough shock for today. After that, he flops back into bed, trying to finally fall asleep, but some strange feeling of growing anxiety seems to haunt him. In the middle of the night, he wakes up with a strange feeling all over his body and a cold sweat. This strange sensation is somewhere between a strong itch or a burning heat. The guy jumps out of bed and immediately heads to the restroom, where when he turns on the light, he discovers a terrifying picture. His whole body was covered with this strange rash, but now this strange purple coating now looked more like terrible scabs or fungi, spreading with unprecedented speed throughout his body in various places. A strange crust also covers his back, leading the young man into a real panic from what was happening. It looked like some kind of horror film, in the spirit of Hollywood thrillers about various infections and viruses. Not the most pleasant sight in general. The infected person begins to rush from side to side in panic, with his eyes open like two spotlights looking for a saving needle. At some point, due to the chaos reigning in his thoughts and around him, he twists his ankle, falling to the floor. Meanwhile, the infection continues to remind itself, growing more and more over his skin, as if gradually absorbing his body, like some kind of purple venom. Finding no other way out, he grabs the knife, and without even heating its blade, with a chopping blow, he tries to rip off this rash from himself, albeit partially along with his skin. But this time nothing works. All the skin is striped with cut wounds, while strange growths remain as if untouched. Everything only gets worse and worse. The rash grows with a new, even greater speed throughout his body, reaching his very neck and getting closer and closer to his face. Like some kind of leprosy, strange growths, in addition to everything else, begin to grow in size, becoming like giant blisters or ticks engorged with blood. The young man finds no other way out except to firmly grasp the knife and point it towards his eyes so as not to see this, consuming him from head to toe with horror. A piercing scream echoes throughout his apartment, echoing through the corridors of the rest of the house, filling them with echoes of despair and torment. Along with the scream, mystical energy spreads through the corridors, to which our old acquaintance appeared, like a moth to the light. Yelan walks along the corridor, literally smelling this energy stinking of horror and agony. Food for Jiazuo, he says, approaching the apartment he needs. He quickly finds the right room, quietly muttering some gloomy speeches, as if talking to himself or to his inner demons, however. Soon everything will come out, literally. This door smelled of this strange energy, as if something truly terrifying and at the same time unknown to the eyes of an ordinary person was happening there. Yelan. Knocking on the door directly asks if anyone is at home, but at first the answer is only silence and a mysterious crackling noise. Meanwhile, the person had almost completely begun to become covered with these terrible growths, which obviously were far from infectious in origin, heart-rendingly screaming pleas for help, an inarticulate delirium. Without thinking twice, the main character begins to open the door. The dull sounds of the lock are accompanied by the same screams, each time becoming louder and louder. However, Yelan is not even surprised. As if as usual, still saying something about spirits and 12 gods, he continues to unlock the door, even without a key. The door swings open, and in front of the young man, the body of another guy, almost completely covered with this strange purple rash, was already lying, from whom cries of agony could still be heard, along with the energy released around him. Yelan says that his condition depended on the state of his soul, and if that guy could throw away the spiritual from the worldly, everything would not be so neglected. The young man stands in front of the body, bending from suffering, not intending to rush and waiting for the right moment to take action. At some point, he tells the infected to stop it, but that guy was no longer himself. This terrible illness, together with many knife wounds, distorted his appearance, along with this shaking his mind. Now in front of Yelan was not a person, but a puppet driven only by suffering, imbued with this strange violet energy. The infected attacks our hero, torment and anger distorted his face in a grimace of rage, and his eyes, glazed with pain, now glowed like two purple torches. But suddenly in the hands of Yelan, a tiny wooden doll appears similar to kokoshi, traditional Japanese painted dolls that play the role of a spiritual container, and in this case, repeating the image of the infected in color. The main character, having effectively displayed his analog of a voodoo doll in front of him, begins to perform his special technique. He lightly hits the doll's head with his finger, thereby influencing the state of its living prototype. From such a light blow, the patient is thrown to the other end of the room, temporarily stunning him. Now Yelan finally has the opportunity to ask the patient several questions that interest him. The young man comes closer to the victim of the disease while he is in a frozen state, but everything changes very quickly again. As soon as Yelan came closer, the infected one immediately began to move again, which even puzzled him a little. Violet energy, in the form of tongues of flared flames, begins to be drawn out of the human body, as if merging into one homogeneous clot of dark energy. Not intending to wait for the moment until the clot gains enough energy, Yelan begins to perform his next technique. With a wave of his hand, he creates a wave of fiery orange energy and sparks that disperses throughout the room. Each individual clot of such energy is removed to the ends of the room, preventing the destructive force from escaping beyond its boundaries. After that, Yelan puts on the floor of the room the mobile phone that he took from old Yang's shop, the same mobile phone that previously belonged to that poor fellow. This creates a sharp surge of energy, due to which a whole vortex of two energies occurs, which, as if two forces are opposite in nature, move away from each other. Dark energy spreads throughout the room, settling on the walls and ceiling in the form of cloudy purple drops, resembling the same blisters and scabs that grew on a person. Gradually, this substance covers almost the entire room, with the exception of the floor, gradually, as if absorbing and merging with the room itself. Further, it seems that all the energy begins to condense on the ceiling, almost directly above the body of the unconscious guy. Now this energy no longer looked like energy, but rather a strange purple slime that had accumulated in one drop and flopped from the ceiling to the floor in the center of the room. Yelan again hears a voice speaking in his head, something otherworldly and mystical, but at the same time closer to him than this dark alien energy. The voice mockingly, chuckling intermittently, says that some people don't want us to become one. The dark purple liquid heads towards Yelan, like a giant amoeba stretching its pseudopod formation closer and closer towards him. But Yelan immediately decides to use another of his techniques, which, with the help of scarlet bursts of energy, stops the advance of this dark mass. With this skill, he literally catches all the accumulated dark energy in an energy net, but this obviously does not stop its metamorphosis. A huge mountain of muddy substance rises above Yelan, acquiring more and more humanoid and therefore no less terrifying features. Next, to finish the job, the young man turns his palms, thereby forcing all the energy to merge into one pulsating ball. Dark energy is still trying to escape from the clutches of scarlet energy. Everything turns out to be countable. That voice appears in Yelan's head again, still uttering mocking words about the current situation. However, the guy clearly does not intend to be distracted by his demons in his head, and independently shuts down the willful voice of reason. Suddenly, the scarlet and violet energy somehow merges into one large clot of energy, taking the form of a huge demonic figure. But without losing control of the situation, Yelan uses another technique, summoning a golden clot of energy in the form of a huge head of an unknown beast, as if flying straight out of his sleeve. The energy monster immediately attacks the clot of dark energy, suppressing and slowly absorbing it, preventing this mass from touching Yelan. Step by step, the dark energy begins to deplete, becoming smaller and smaller in its size and power, as if one energy was splitting another, like matter and antimatter. The purple substance begins to retreat back. Under the onslaught of light energy, it seems that the spirit has finally weakened. Yelan dissipates the clot of golden energy, again turning it into a cluster of fiery sparks swirling around his hand. The young man redirects energy to the source of this darkness, namely to the telephone, which initially served as the basis for the conflict, and as it turned out for a reason, given that it was this gadget that became the seat of the evil spirit. Yelan uses the art of exorcism to finally finish what he started and drive out the evil from this place. The energies finally combine into one, gradually taking the form of two pulsating and rotating rings, becoming smaller and smaller with each passing moment. Finally, the energy finally dwindles, becoming a sort of dwarf star as if it was about to go supernova. Eventually, the glow fades and the clot of energy takes the form of a tiny wooden figurine of a woman with complex arms and legs and a missing head. Yelan, picking up this figurine, again enters into dialogue with the demonic voice in his head. Together, they begin to discuss their current victim. It would seem that it was already impossible to save him, but nevertheless. The other guy finally comes to his senses, lying on the floor, still tormented by wounds and cuts, as well as already faded and withered blisters. Despite the fact that his condition was slightly better before, he was still not in the best shape. He sees a guest in front of him, as if appearing out of nowhere, and shudders still twitching painfully on the floor, like a dying insect. Yelan, squatting in front of the victim of the evil spirit, directly asks him if he killed the person, but in response he sees only a face distorted with scars and a grimace of bewilderment. The guy heart-rendingly says that he couldn't just kill someone, especially being within the confines of his home. However, an otherworldly voice in his head senses lies in his words, and tells Yelan that this deceitful soul will taste great. Raising himself on his hands, the victim peers with a dull gaze into the face of his interlocutor. But instead of a young man in a red cloak, he sees something more terrible. The appearance of Yelan takes on a demonic form, a figure surrounded by darkness and scarlet energy, coupled with sharp fangs, horns, and eyes blazing with otherworldly rage. The guy screams in horror, but for a moment the demonic image disappears against the backdrop of a burning chandelier. Perhaps the danger would have passed if not for the voice that appeared in his head. He begins to feel a certain extraneous presence, as if some gloomy aura surrounded him. Now he simply cannot leave, because this something has already penetrated his consciousness. Looking to the side, he sees in front of him a huge, monstrous face of a demon, frozen in a nightmarish, heartbreaking scream. Now it's all over for the boy. Yelan leaves the empty apartment, not paying attention to the screams echoing through the corridors of the house. It seems that this is an ordinary day of many for him. Well, an ordinary weekday. Every day he hears demons devouring someone's souls. Further events are instantly transferred to another dilapidated room, which should have been demolished long ago. But now a business conversation was in full swing in it, although this room could hardly be called a suitable place for this. A specialized specialist and part-time Taoist magician, Zhang Zhihua, actively read aloud the report about what happened in this apartment, and judging by his words, nothing truly terrible happened here. His colleague Xunjiada picks up his words, confirming that the victim will no longer be able to give normal testimony, and, in principle, now he will say something in Vryatli. It turns out that most of the other residents had already left this house long ago, but the owner of this apartment suffered the not-so-enviable fate of considering that, of course, what could be worse than being dismembered is also feeling the influence of an evil spirit. Zhang Zhihua saw this guy even before this incident, and even then he had some imperfections due to his lifestyle. But now he looked more like a living corpse, and it's unlikely this is the effect of purpura or any other infection from the Umbrella Corporation. Moving on to other details of the case, Zhang turns to his other colleague, Miss Shenfei Lai, who all this time has been examining every speck of dust in this room in search of any clues. She says that thanks to her ability to recover, she could take a look. What happened here before? Taking a step forward and closing her eyes, she begins to peer into the past, building a chain of events that could clarify the situation on what happened, any better than pulling threads on the board of evidence. She feels that yesterday there was an extremely high concentration of ominous purple energy, so high that it was able to transform into an essence. Zhong tells Xunjiada that in such particularly complicated cases, many more people are involved in the proceedings, but his colleague has a slightly different opinion. However, their conversation is quickly interrupted by visions of Fei Lai. After the entity's body was thrown into the garbage chute, the parasitic evil spirit was able to gather enough negative energy to release the power of such power. The person who banished this spirit used earth-type spells, Shen said, smelling the slight scent of river sand. The man from the vision looks quite young, but she cannot see his face, as if he is wearing some kind of black mask. But unexpectedly, this young man from her visions rarely turns in her direction, as if noticing her, thereby breaking the fourth wall. Out of surprise, Miss Shenfei Lai falls down, interrupting her broadcast into the past, but her comrades quickly run to her aid. Mr. Zhang, picking up the girl in his hand, is about to use the spell of the Golden Purification card, which brings Fei Lai to her senses. From the effect of the spell, she immediately comes to her senses, immediately telling everything she saw. It turns out that the wearer of the mask had a yellow rank artifact, but all other details were as if in a fog. This demonic face was still standing before her eyes. Specialist Jun notes that the incident with the yellow rank artifact should require special attention, but nevertheless, if this has no connection to the main goal, then they should not waste their time on us with such trifles. By virtue of his powers, he is not going to help the others in the murder investigation itself. But for now, they all just have to watch what happened and what is happening. In any case, we don't even fully know who and how dealt with that purple one. This kind of devilry happens every day all over the country. You can't just keep track of everything. And staying here and playing Ghostbusters would be the stupidest idea yet. Mr. Zun and Mime Shen leave the apartment, leaving Zhang alone to investigate the remaining clues, on the condition that he reports any new evidence. Zhihua is left alone on the landing, the rest of the investigation now entirely in his hands. He was especially interested in those visions: red clothes, river sand, demonic mask, soul eater. All the key points were actively spinning in his thoughts. Such bright signs cannot be so insignificant. Zhong returns back to the apartment. He already has a couple of assumptions about who might be behind this, and he knows who to contact for this question. Through the local analog of the Watch app, he contacts his certain master, from whom he quickly receives an answer, based on which he should soon arrive in Jianshan. Zhong is interested in the reasons for his visit to their town, but in response, the master only talks about the recently opened comic book exhibition, through which it will be more convenient for him to drop by to see his friend. This old man's unhealthy obsession with 2D art is starting to irritate the specialist, as well as his recent negligence in an incident with another red rank artifact. It only seems to infuriate our hero even more. With his last message, their short correspondence ends. It seems that the meeting will take place. Next, the cutting event is transferred straight to a hot party, or, to be precise, from a powerful, profusely flared fire, in the middle of which frightened people were running in a panic. Some ran to put it out, and some, on the contrary, tried to leave this fuss. One of these turns out to be our old friend Ye Lan, slowly leaving this place against the spectacular backdrop of a burning building. But not having had time to go far from the scene, a tall, eerie figure appears behind him, placing his bony hand on the young man's shoulder. A certain mystical ring was worn on the middle finger of his hand, which immediately attracted Yelan's attention. This stranger was clearly not an ordinary person. Grandfather told the guy to walk away without looking back, and under no circumstances turning around so as not to attract attention to himself, and now the reason for this becomes clear. The tall figure asks where the young man is going, to which Yelan replies that he is going home, while quietly trying to avoid the question. But the gloomy man continues to insist on his proposal to take the young man to the police if he is lost. Yelan, remaining calm, tells the stranger that his family does not live here and that his last name is not Fan, thereby trying to unhook himself from the grip of the bone hand. The stranger nevertheless lets the guy go, assuming that he made a mistake, and taking advantage of the moment, Yelan quickly leaves this damn place. The stranger's facial features and clothing remain indistinguishable, but in principle, the main character is not particularly interested in this. Yelan walks along the path through the thickets, cold tears flowing down his cheeks, and instead of intelligible speech or thoughts, he utters only inarticulate, bitter moans. Moving further along the path, he comes out onto a richly and brightly decorated street, where a certain local masquerade is already in full swing. Each person hid their faces behind masks of demons, animals, and mythical creatures, as if they were also hiding their own identity. In Yelan's eyes, it looked especially creepy. The effect of the uncanny valley was working to its fullest. From this moment on, the guy swears that he will be alone, just so as not to let strangers near him, in whose dark soul's darkness may be hidden. Having run home, Yelan immediately grabs a pencil and a piece of paper, trying to quickly capture from his memory the very ring that was on the stranger's hand. He quickly manages to depict this unremarkable, but even more mystical ring, on which several intricate symbols emerged. Suddenly, the boy feels an unexpected pain on his right shoulder, as if he had been touched by a hot seal. Looking under his t-shirt, Yelan discovers on his shoulder a black mark left in the form of a human palm. The young man could not even imagine how it appeared. Suddenly, a couple of knocks are heard on the door of his room, followed by an announcement about the arrival of an express delivery. But there was no one behind the door. The delivery man seemed to have disappeared, and in front of the door there was only one heavy cardboard box with an unknown parcel. Opening the parcel, Yelan discovers at its bottom a demonic carnival mask with a note lying next to it, with the inscription, "Chungki Folk Jewelry." The guy takes this painted mask in his hands and peers into its brightly painted eyes, which even vaguely resemble the real eyes of some predatory animal. But a moment later, he throws it away, calling this mask a useless thing. But even then, he had no idea what he had gotten himself into. A little later, he notices strange changes on his right hand, with which he first touched that strange mask. It seems that this was not there a second ago, strange black spots. More like a coating of soot, they covered the bulk of his palm and entire hand. This greatly worries Yelan, and he decides to examine that mask again, realizing that something is clearly wrong with it. Fortunately, this cardboard mask was still lying at the other end of the room, where the young man had last left it. Touching the colorful coating of the mask, Yelan sees a mystical glow begin to emanate from it, but fortunately, apart from this glow, nothing else bizarre happened to it. But everything quickly changes when the mask unexpectedly bites its holder on the finger, and spiral-shaped tattoos appear at the site of the bite. In a moment, the tattoo spreads in a single pattern across his arm, along with a mystical purple sheen. Many long clots of energy seem to burst out of the mask and head towards Yelan, who, in a state of fright bordering on shock, was unable to let go of this magical object. He feels a voice appear in the back of his mind, repeating his name over and over again, like the maniac on the phone from the Scream movies. However, Yelan quickly comes to his senses, and all this time the guy was in class and all these visions could well be just an object of his fantasy, or maybe not. The teacher angrily orders the young man to go to the blackboard to demonstrate to the class the solution to this example written on the blackboard. Our hero has no choice but to go to the blackboard, and holding the chalk creaking on the board in his hand, complete the task, temporarily defeating the eternal enemy of any schoolchild, mathematics. After which he indifferently goes back to his place, apparently perplexed by his method of solution and his gloomy appearance in the morning. Sitting at his desk, he reflects on what happened. Apparently, what he saw on that man's hand last night was very similar to what he saw 3 years ago before. This may be connected with that spirit, the owner of the ring. Soon he heads to another class, apparently. There is a person in his circle who could help solve this problem. Among all the students present in the class, he calls student Sumi Shui to him. This unexpected address leaves many present in amazement. It seems that someone was a real crush within the confines of his school. They go out into the corridor together, and Yelan hands Yui a box of cinnabar, a paint that matches the color of the mineral of the same name, somewhere between blood red and scarlet. The student turns out to be very surprised by this gift, but the guy immediately reminds her of his duty when he briefly took her cinnabar, and oddly enough, it turned out to be very useful. Zhu notes that when Yelan paints using only one color, the result is quite aesthetically pleasing. Despite the narrow range of colors and the fact that he used almost all of this cinnabar, there were only remnants left in the box. While the girl is in full swing sharing her artistic knowledge with the guy, several more people interfere in their space, violating the privacy of their conversation. Another student approaches them, judging by his height and overall dimensions, one of the high school students. Yelan tries not to pay attention to him, but the lanky Pole clearly wants to attract attention to himself. He pretends to pass by, trying to supposedly accidentally push him on the shoulder, but Yelan moves away at the right moment, which is why the high school student almost falls off his feet from his own impulse. This prank begins to anger the school bully more and more, and he decides to openly show his passive aggression and toxicity. With a malicious grin on his face, he turns to Yelan in a mocking voice, arrogantly asking what class he is from. But at the same moment, Shui comes between them both, standing up for Yelan, thereby preventing another school fight. A high school student, together with his friends, decides to give up this matter and walks away from Sin further along the corridor, turning a blind eye to the subject of his bullying. Yelan continues to watch their group out of the corner of his eye, while Kajue, still in his repertoire, continues to tell stories about his paints, offering him other paints, but the young man is clearly not interested in paints now. He notices in the crowd of high school students another student, his peer, whom these high school students dragged with them everywhere as a constant subject for their ridicule and mockery. The student also notices this extraneous attention from her interlocutor, temporarily stopping her chatter. However, Xu says that he is not really such a bad person, and sometimes appearances can be deceiving. Not intending to listen to any more excuses about this dunce, Yelan ends his conversation with the girl. He has more important things to do than just chatting. At some point, Zhui tries to stop him, but nothing can stop this guy now, and the girl didn't even have time to ask him for his Instagram. Then the events are transferred to the school warehouse, where a variety of equipment was stored, and sometimes, just like now, various showdowns took place between many school children. This time, another bullying session took place here. A crowd of high school students mocks one of the younger students for ratting them out as they smoked, but now because this quiet guy doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut, they threaten to tape his mouth shut. At one point, in order to finally punish him, they decide to beat the student right on the spot so that he no longer dares to put a spoke in their wheels. The junior himself, unable to do anything, only looked at it in fear, shedding tears and cold sweat. Yelan was passing by the entrance to that room and heard a dull noise coming from the warehouse. A picture unfolds before him of how 4 healthy high school students, like a pack of jackals, beat up one junior student, holding him in a ring. At the same moment, Yelan sees how literally on the necks of each of the hooligans sat one of these dark entities, parasitic spirits who so successfully found themselves suitable victim carriers, a successful source of a whole bunch of negative emotions. Clots of dark energy surrounded the junior high school student, feeding on and absorbing his suffering and fear, while at the same time eating the anger of the high school students themselves. Who would have thought that everything would be so lively? Yelan thought before interfering with the action. All the entities are the first to notice the young man, and as if on cue, turn their empty gazes directly to him. To interrupt this feast, Yelan opens the curtains, letting rays of sunlight into the room and dispelling the darkness. The spirits, like shadows, begin to gradually dissipate, either hiding in the corners and all sorts of cracks away from the light, or literally evaporating on the spot. The hooligans feel like something is literally being detached from their already not particularly pure souls, at the same moment stopping the beating. Yelan sarcastically asks those present if they were also sent here to get mats for a physical education lesson. However, it looked strange, considering that it was so far before the lesson. Keibo Chao almost gets into a fight with Yelan, but at some point they change their minds, refusing unnecessary problems. The hooligans leave, leaving in the warehouse only the main character and a barely alive elementary school student who is still like a rag doll lying near the shelves with small inventory. But still, this guy rises to his feet, thanking Yelan for his unexpected help. But his savior was now only interested in the mats for the physical education lesson. Without paying much attention to the gratitude addressed to him, our hero, still with the same poker face, offers the victim to help him carry such heavy equipment. Together they drag one of the mats from the second to the first floor, simultaneously discussing the past event and exchanging words of encouragement and everything like that. In the end, the quiet guy, whose name by the way is Sun Mao, admits that he probably really should talk less, since any other ways to counteract this bullying are pointless, because these mugs won't just be expelled from school. His words somehow catch Yelan, and it seems that for the first time he is not so indifferent to the problem of an outsider. There is something in it. Then the events move to the sports field, where a physical education lesson has already begun, but one of the members is missing. Meanwhile, Yelan watched everything that was happening from the roof of the upper floors of the school, leaning on the railing. The demonic voice in his head tells him that he already thought that the young man would begin to act. In response, Yelan says to himself that there are too many eyes to do anything right now, but at what point did this start? Since when did these parasitic spirits begin to flock together? Before they always acted alone and fed on only one victim. Now their number has increased exponentially. This can lead to problems in the future. Yelan addresses these questions to his inner voice, but the otherworldly entity has nothing to say about this. The young man notices strange whims in the spirit's speech and asks him what this might be connected with, in response to which the voice reproaches its carrier for the lack of control of the situation. Yelan, with all his abilities and free time, is not able to control the spread of evil spirits. Of course, all these whims are mostly related to the taste of the spirit itself, but nevertheless the message was correct. The guy should have devoted more effort and time in searching for that person with the ring. Of course, one could simply move to another school, and even more so, if given a choice, Yelan clearly would not want to do such things. But the current circumstances are definitely not about freedom of choice. But nothing can be done, because this is the only school in relative proximity to home. And from the main places of events, there seems to be a choice. But at the same time, there is none. Meanwhile, another old acquaintance, specialist Zhang Jihua, was already on the way to the school. It seems that to find at least some clues from that man in red from yesterday's incident, you will have to sweat a lot. The victim himself did not mention any man in red at that time, but Shen Feilai's ability did not provide any specific information on this case. Unfortunately, our detective still has too few funds and equipment to clarify anything. But fortunately, he managed to get some information about the recently murdered girl, and from her friend that the victim with the phone number of the murdered woman went into an old thrift store, where Zhang learned about a high school student named Yelan. Yelan, a student from Zhengcheng City No. 3 High School, had not attracted much attention in any matters before, but now something was clearly brewing. Although Zhang did not even think that some student there could be in any way involved in the incident of the red rank, but if during this case our investigator does nothing, then he will have to listen to lectures from the master. Having passed through a sleeping guard, our detective finds himself in the corridor of an educational institution. The corridors were quiet. Apparently another lesson was going on. Looking out the window of one in a nearby classroom, Zhang is surprised at the seriousness of all the students. Oh, this is the future of our country. Looking for Yelan's class, the specialist goes further along the corridor, examining each monotonous door and windows, clouded as on a frosty morning. In search of a suitable class, he turns to an unfamiliar man, but in an attempt to present his document, only a strange speech sounds in response. The man, apparently one of the guards of this school, slowly approaches Zhang. His strange gait, resembling the steps of zombies from films about the living dead, begins to alarm. And instead of intelligible words, only one repeated word was heard. "You're late, late, late," the guard repeated. Now he really looked more like a living corpse than an ordinary person. At the same instant, dozens of students' eyes, glowing with a violet sparkle, begin to look towards the detective, and have now also acquired an eerie demonic appearance. The guard begins to run after Zhang along the corridor. Everything around begins to look like some kind of nightmare, as if at a temperature of 42 degrees. Everything around acquired dark, gloomy tones, and the only thing visible in these shadows were hundreds, if not dozens, of demonic eyes. At one point, the guard almost grabbed Zhang's arm, but he still managed to tear the sleeve of his jacket. This clearly angered our investigator. In a rage, the detective grabs the hand of the living dead, and in the classic way of all detective comedies, angrily reminds him how much this suit costs. Then he throws him over himself, hitting him on the tiled floor of the school. This was too much on the part of the spirits. The infected guard still firmly grabs the detective's hand, trying to throw him to the ground, but at one moment everything quickly changes again. Having made a sharp somersault and escaped from the grip of the living dead, Zhang, with an exclamation that things will not work out like that, takes the situation into his own hands. Taking a stance, he casts a spirit gaze spell, forming a protective ring of blue flames around himself. Now Zhang is determined to fight back even all the demonic entities in this school if necessary. Seeing a victim of dark energy in front of him, our detective understands that all this is the work of spirits of henchmen. But why are there so many of them in this place? So many that they were able to absorb an entire school, and with it dozens of people. The guard again attacks Zhang from behind, but with a sidelong glance he notices the attacker in time. He dodges the powerful blow of the absorbed one, seeing how he, without feeling any pain, punches the wall with his fist. And once behind the infected person, he uses a spell to separate the essence and spirit of the patron of the North in order to expel the dark energy, or at least weaken it. The technique seems to work, but dark clots of energy, escaping from the man's body, again head towards him, again inhabiting him. The puppet of dark forces, again, seems to be attacking our detective with even greater frenzy. Now there is not a drop of anything human left in his eyes. At first, this takes our specialist by surprise, but Zhang once again deftly dodges the attack, running in a circle away from the attacker in a deadly dance. The game of cat and mouse is interrupted by the sound of glass cracking throughout the corridor, accompanied by eerie moans and screams escaping from the windows of the possessed students. Everything begins to resemble a real zombie apocalypse from the movie Alive. Whole waves and crowds of infected people, in one large army of darkness, are heading towards the only non-possessed person in this school, Zhang Jihua. Their faces, distorted in screams and angry grins, now looked more like the faces of otherworldly monsters themselves. There was no longer anything human left in them from former school children. Now they were soulless dolls in the clutches of a huge mass of evil spirits. Darkness surrounds our detective, and now he is at a dead end. Who would have thought that it would be so easy for him to fall into this trap? Suddenly from the crowd, as if out of thin air, a figure appears, an uninfected student who pushes Zhang, thereby throwing him out of the window and rushing after him. The detective finds himself on the ground, and the mysterious figure of the savior immediately appears near him. This savior turns out to be a suspected student named Ye Lan, who immediately, not intending to listen to formal thanks, orders the detective to follow him if he wants to live. The young man rushes ahead, while the specialist barely has time to catch up with him, and at the same time, not intending to express any gratitude, only wanting the essence of everything that happened. While running, they manage to discuss some issues, but these conversations quickly develop into an argument, despite the fact that now is probably not the right time. The rest of the possessed students also rush after them, directly jumping from the upper floors of the school. It seems that they really did not feel anything other than an all-consuming hunger. Immediately, Yelan stops and, wrapping his right arm, decides that it is still worth acting according to Plan B. By this time, Zhang had already managed to send his colleagues their coordinates and a brief description of the situation, since the danger of what was happening here had already reached the orange rank. For now, they should find a suitable safe place, but besides this school there were no suitable shelters, and realizing this, Yelan decides to solve the problem using his old methods. At one point, Zhang tries to stop the guy, since it is not permissible for them to harm the students, and given everything that just happened, they should find other methods. But during the chat, he does not notice one of the possessed. Yelan pushes the man away and uses one of his techniques to push the attacker away, thereby incapacitating him.
The detective asks the young man in surprise what kind of technique this is, in response to which Yelan replies that this is a technique for the ritual sign of the sun, the energy of which exceeds the energy of a full daylight hours.
These parasitic entities fear sunlight more than ordinary ghosts, even taking on flesh in the form of a host victim. Therefore, this technique will be the most effective now, Yelan thought as he delivered another powerful blow to the next infected. During the battle, Zhang notices an interesting detail, the same golden artifact that Shen Feilai mentioned in her knowledge. And then he understands why they went outside the school. Yelan planned in advance to lure all the students out, so he chose such an open and spacious place. Blow by blow, the young man begins to deal with crowds of infected, like a small flame of light dispelling the growing darkness around him. He doesn't just strike, he literally strikes with light, thereby blinding and weakening spirits without causing any physical damage to their hosts. The specialist is surprised at everything that is happening. This is definitely not an accident. Such ability to control the body is not something that can be taught in a day or two. After some time of massacre, Yelan manages to clear the crowd of possessed students. Now they all covered the entire area around the entrance to the school with a single carpet of human bodies. At the same time, Zhang practically did not lift a finger during the battle. All this time he simply sat not far from Yelan himself while he dealt with the approaching darkness, while he jokingly notes that there are quite a lot of students in this school. In response, Yelan just grins, because before this he was also told to go to physical education, provided that all the other students are not even able to play any competition with him. At the same time, he notes that even first-year students at this school must go to the evening shift. In fact, because of this, there are almost always quite a lot of people here. However, a typical Japanese school, why be surprised? Taking a break from the conversation, Yelan notices a suspicious black car with license plate A44395, which, according to him, ran past the main gate for the third time. It seems very strange to our hero, who could be so interested in a fight among students in the middle of the night, and also in the middle of the schoolyard. It can't just be an illusion. Jong never ceases to be amazed at the abilities of this young man. In addition, he so deftly and skillfully scattered a whole wave of these living dead, so he also managed, at the same time, to monitor the surrounding situation. Approaching the main gate of the school, Yelan notices strange spatial distortions right along the fence and around the entire school. Having touched these distortions, the main character immediately finds himself again behind the detective's back, thereby catching him by surprise, and even more understanding the neglect of this situation. Having gone completely through this kind of reverse teleport, Yelan realizes that they are in a vicious circle. To verify his theory, he looks at the time on his smartphone and discovers that it is still only 20 hours and 3 minutes. Having taken out his ticket from the metro, Yelan realizes that the journey from the station to the school takes a little more than half an hour, which means that the passage of time feels different. But even if this is normal, then he clearly knows the time of restoration of his spiritual energy, and this could not just happen in a minute. Jong suggests that this distortion of space and time may be due to the influence of spirits, but Yelan cannot answer these questions because, according to him, he is just a high school student. The specialist is trying to send a message to one of his contacts, but even if he succeeds, there is no guarantee that the message will reach the recipient. Not intending to continue enjoying Groundhog Day, Yelan decides to go and see the limits and supposed source of this illusion. But Jong decides to take on this work himself, reproaching the guy for being just a student and nothing more. In response, our hero tells the smug detective that he doesn't look very reliable and we don't want him to get in the way. Jong says that he is bound hand and foot by the provision of the organization's charter, according to which, after using his abilities, he is obliged to provide a report in the size of a large report. Everything would be written out and sewn in next year, but if their opponents are now ordinary demons, then... And at the same moment, our specialist, clutching his head, understands that this is business. This is an excellent opportunity to show everyone who is a true master of his craft. But as soon as he is distracted from his thoughts, it turns out that there is already no trace of the boy. Jung rushes after Yelan, not intending to give him all control over the situation, and especially not allowing him to act alone. But as soon as the detective gets into one of the school corridors, the boy's figure literally dissolves in place, leaving the man in a completely empty corridor. After a moment, everything around begins to blur, taking on negative dark tones as if in a not very high-quality Photoshop. Suddenly, something seems to envelop Jong, some scarlet energy distorting the space around him. It seems that this day is becoming more and more interesting. He finds himself in a huge theater hall, right in the middle of a wide wall in front of a horde of dark, writhing, demonic entities, as if gathered for a theatrical performance. And then, with heavy steps down the stairs, an possessed guard approaches the stage, dragging a huge box with unknown contents on his hump. Having come close enough to the stage, he throws the box with all his strength straight towards the detective, like dynamite with an accumulated snail. Having flown into the stage with enormous power, the box raises a huge cloud of dust, thereby covering almost the entire stage from its audience. The parasitic entities stood in dense rows in front of the stage, stretching their empty, sinister smiles onto their shapeless faces, no matter what rank these spirits were. But they were still just high school students susceptible to their influence. A tall, golden figure of a solar spirit appears in front of Jong, stopping a box flying at the man, which a moment ago could have become his coffin. Using the art of summoning the spirit along with the immortal law of the Northern Palace, banishing spirits and calling out evil, the detective provides reliable protection around himself. It seems that someone has simply been underestimated all this time. Meanwhile, Yelan continued to look around the dark, but fortunately empty corridors of the school, alone only with his inner demon. A mystical voice tells him that these illusions can be a magical barrier, and that the amateur, as he called Jong according to his calculations, should already be dead. But Yelan is in no hurry with such methods. He understands that his new acquaintance is none other than a Taoist magician of the Way of Heavenly Mentors school, so he shouldn't underestimate him so much. But then the voice speaks of its unexpected thought. Usually demonic henchmen are quiet and harmless, but they become active if their carrier is an evil spirit or a vicious person. In other words, such a number of spirits in this place could be provoked by something special. Yelan just grins in response, saying that this is already an obvious and banal thought. The young man already thought that he was just angry about yesterday's incident, but he is simply stupid. Even if in such a situation there was at least one instigator, he would not be physically able to create a magical barrier, the radius of which would be enough for an entire school. As soon as Yelan entered this school for the first time, he had a strange feeling. Definitely everything here is not as simple as it seems. At the same time, thinking about this, the guy continued to wander around the classrooms, distributing magical breams to the numb, possessed students. Approaching the last one, Yelan decides, for the sake of variety, to give him a slap so that, as they say, life doesn't seem like raspberries. But the possessed student suddenly comes to his senses and grabs Yelan's hand in an ominous voice along with an evil, otherworldly look, telling him that this time our hero is late. Then the events move to the city center, to the large Conde Hotel, which, as always, received regular guests around the clock. A young woman with an attractive appearance and a punkish style was being examined at the front desk to check into one of the many rooms in this hotel. At the same time, she was interested in information about the place of check-in of two other guests, an elderly man and another young girl. But the doorman did not have the information she needed, or he did not want to disclose it. She walks down the corridor straight to her desired room. Fortunately, she had to do without the services of a concierge or porters. Stopping in the middle of the corridor, the girl carefully looks around herself just to avoid being seen by prying eyes. Not intending to bother herself anymore, she uses her magical abilities to carry her luggage to the desired room. During her last meeting, she didn't listen very carefully. Hell, she doesn't even remember where she could find materials for this case. But fortunately, everything went smoothly anyway. Putting her ear to the door of the desired room, after a couple of minutes of waiting, she heard nothing in response. However, at the same moment, behind the trust, such a familiar and annoying vibration of the phone was heard. It seemed that he would have to look in without asking. Inside, our new heroine finds a phone bursting with messages, and with it a hotel guest lying unconscious. Looking under her shirt, she will discover the remnant of violet sinister energy. These spirits have already penetrated every house and every crevice of this unfortunate city. But the problem of spirit minions is not the first problem that interests her. It will be much more interesting to read messages on an attention-grabbing phone. Having successfully bypassed the screen lock, the stranger finds out the geolocation of the desired place, the coordinates of school number 3. The action returns back to one of the school classrooms. One of the awakened students grabs Yelan's hand, as if deliberately not allowing him to touch himself. This student turns out to be Sun Mao, already familiar to us, but now his appearance was not the same as before. Now in his gaze there was only a certain exhaustion, as if he was neither alive nor dead, in a word, sad. Yelan already thought that his old friend was possessed just like the others, but as it turned out, this was not entirely true. Sun says that once this whole nightmare started here, he was scared when he saw these sinister entities. Holding our hero's hand tightly, he realized that these entities could help him well, given the general circumstances. Sun Mao tells Yelan that all these spirits are just poor creatures, offended by evil people just like himself. In response to this, our hero jokingly congratulates him for having found many new friends in the person of these monsters. But Sun Mao clearly does not appreciate this joke. He squeezes his interlocutor, Yelan, even tighter, as if a wrestling tournament is about to begin between them. Yelan says that they both should not have involved other people in this straitjacket game. Sun Mao is not even going to listen to him, or even respond in any way. Instead of words, his lips stretch into an ominous smile, and his aura takes on a gloomy purple color. With all his strength, he throws Yelan across the entire class. It's amazing how much physical power these parasitic spirits gave him, and it's scary to imagine what he is now capable of. But our hero manages to successfully land on one of the desks, taking a defensive stance and preparing to take another blow. Sun Mao continues to show off his dark powers, and like damn Dr. Strange, he picks up several chairs, preparing to use them as makeshift projectiles. The chairs, engulfed in purple energy, rush towards Yelan and firmly chain him to the wall. Now the main character is immobilized in all his limbs. Sun Mao, like a typical villain, begins to talk about his plan. He is going to take brutal revenge on all those who mocked and did not notice him since childhood, but ordinary death is too easy for them. His face is distorted, his eyes are placed in different directions, and his smile stretches even more, almost to his ears. Now his face has become more like a mask made of skin, stretched over the inner monster that has long been hiding in him. Sun Mao realized that people dare to mock each other, only because they have never experienced anything like this in their own skin. They simply do not understand what it is like. Dark spirits are the tormented souls of those who were previously tortured to death, and now as they become one with the body of the host, he will experience the same suffering that they once experienced on themselves. At that very moment, Sun Mao finally goes crazy, and like a mad maniac, he screams that from today, he will allow the whole world to feel all this horror on his own skin. The obsessed boy calls this a kind of cleansing. Yelan, feeling something otherworldly in the words of his former friend, that former Sun Mao could not say anything like that. With every second, his body became just an empty shell in the clutches of these monsters. At some point, Sun invites Yelan to join him. Since our hero is not like all the other people, he has the talent to see spirits, and together they could become good companions. Yelan is not going to believe in such nonsense of a madman, and is trying to reach Mao's true mind, in the hope of showing him that all this is just a deception, and he himself is just a puppet on the strings of fear and pain. Our hero says that these spirits are not at all as harmless as they might seem from the very beginning. In fact, they are just using him, only because he has a connection with them. But Sun Mao can't be saved just like that. He just turns a blind eye to all Yelan's words and decides to resort to more effective methods of communication. Instead of further trying to persuade him, the possessed one simply directs spirits at him to change his consciousness from the inside, making him his second soulless shell like himself. Yelan still breaks out of the chair's shackles, preparing to give battle to the approaching darkness. The parasitic spirits disperse and hide behind their host in fear, sensing another more powerful and even more monstrous entity lurking in Yelan's mind. The young man says that these pitiful spirits, compared to the creatures that live in him, are the same as a pack of harmless elves. Suddenly, an otherworldly demonic voice stops the speech of our hero, who certainly wants to introduce his enemy to even greater nightmares, but it looks like now Yelan will have to get out on his own. For a couple of moments, the young man remains confused. Once again, due to the treachery of his inner voice, he will have to improvise. Yelan tries to get out of the situation on his own, trying to amicably return to the topic of conversation, undermining the significance of communication. Sun Mao, surrounded by his otherworldly friends, at first did not respond to the words of the protagonist, as if telepathically communicating with the spirits around him. Smirking lightly and realizing that now the advantage is on his side, the schoolboy offended by the West world jokingly says that his friend should not bring such dangerous things into the school walls. This greatly worries his friends. At the same instant, a massive human figure distorted by dark energy bursts into the classroom. She turns out to be the student Keibo Chow, already familiar to us, but now he looked more like a huge mutated zombie demon. Evil spirits had greatly distorted his body, significantly increasing his muscles to grotesque proportions and filling his eyes with uncontrollable rage. The possessed big man takes long strides and goes to ram Yelan, not paying attention to the surrounding obstacles, although it's unlikely that some school furniture could have stopped him. Meanwhile, Sun Mao hides behind a broken wall, watching the real fight of David and Goliath, and ominously thinking through the main details of his villainous plan. A huge hypertrophied carcass like Frank, who has accumulated an ult, swings his powerful fist straight at Yelan, threatening to knock him into the ground with one single blow. But our hero, realizing that he won't be able to take all the damage for DFAT, decides to retreat, running as fast as he can into the school corridor. The first thing he needs to do is think through a plan before just flattery is thrown into trouble. The zombified Keibo rushes after his victim, putting his hands forward like a typical caricatured zombie from mainstream media culture. Yelan, right on the run, again turns to his inner voice for help, finally making sure that he simply cannot cope on his own. Having received the answer from his inner self, Yedan decisively stops right in front of the attacking enemy, preparing to accept the enemy's attack. Deftly dodging the infected fist, our hero, enveloped in a golden aura, decides to finish his job to the end. An incredibly powerful blow throws Keibo to the other end of the corridor, knocking out all the darkness that had accumulated in him. The parasitic spirits dissipate and finally leave their fleshly shell, dissolving as always into the shadows of the corridor. However, a blow alone is not enough, and the darkness returns to the wearer's body in the same way as it came out. The strength of this infected person greatly exceeded the strength of the other disciples. As an inner voice said, people with very powerful spiritual power are able to release them in huge quantities after they were absorbed by darkness. But Yelan feels that the energy of more than 20 of these parasitic entities is now concentrated in his opponent's body, and it will take a decent amount of time to sort them out. The influence of the gloomy aura clearly affects the appearance of the infected. With every second, he begins to look more and more like a withered corpse, a little more, and he will not be able to contain all the accumulated darkness within himself. But if this continues, it will be impossible to bring Keibo back and he will remain a completely empty shell. Most likely after the release of all these spirits, he will immediately die. Events moments later are transferred to the roof of the school. Our hero needs to find a more advantageous position to win this battle, while maintaining all his key priorities. Yelan immediately knocks down the door leading from the landing onto the roof, continuing to retreat from the wrath of the possessed big man. While running, he manages to bandage his hand, simultaneously assessing the situation for the execution of the last step in his backup plan. The possessed rushes after him, and with great speed, like the Incredible Hulk, he swings his hand, swollen from a dark aura, for another deadly blow. The main character manages to dodge quick, but also clumsy blows, presenting a good opportunity for a counterstrike. Yelan presses his palm against his opponent's torso, enveloping the possessed guy's body in a tight ribbon-like rope of light energy. Jumping to the side, our hero runs around his opponent, laying layer after layer of his magic rope, each time pulling his improvised lasso tighter and tighter. Light energy completely fetters the infected, gradually drawing out the dark energy of parasitic spirits from his body. However, this does not work 100%, and within a second, he is already trying to break out of his bonds. His rage turns out to be too powerful, even for such a powerful magical power of Yelan. Kebo takes off, making a powerful jerk in front of us, knocking our hero off his feet, but Yelan quickly assesses the situation and again redirects the scales in his direction. Grouped in the air, he touches the possessed with his hand using the Sun Seal spell, expelling spirits. All the darkness, like accumulated pus, bursts out of the infected person's body, but this time almost completely dissipating in the darkness of the night. Freed from the shackles of darkness, Kebo falls onto the cold floor of the school roof. Remains hopes that he is still alive, and that the influence of the spirits has not greatly affected his mind. Yelan, having spent half his strength, drops to one knee, collecting his thoughts and hoping that this is finally all over. But the parasitic spirits are clearly not going to just give up. Now they are again gathering into a clot of darkness, gaining strength again. Together with their newfound strength coupled with anger, they rush towards Yelan, intending to hit him in the back with all their might. But they are prevented from doing this by a suddenly emerging barrier of pure golden energy, which completely shelters the young man from the attack of darkness. The demonic voice points out that using the breath of light as a shield was not a bad idea, but if Yelan continues to use this energy wastefully, it will be much more difficult for him to deal with such dangers in the future. But in response, our hero points out that if there were more people in this school with similar spiritual power as Kebo Chao, then Sun Mao would send them all at once to certainly deal with Yelan, so we can immediately say that this kind of phenomenon is quite rare. In any case, these parasitic spirits become truly dangerous only when they acquire a host. And in this situation, the only threat remains only Sun Mao himself. But even in this situation, everything is quite going according to plan. Yelan remembers Mr. Zhang, and realizing that this man managed to become a Taoist magician, he too can pose some kind of threat to Yelan and the rest of his plan. In the future, this may also become a problem, no less than all these parasitic spirits and other otherworldly evil spirits. Next, the events are transferred to the theater hall, where the unequal battle of Master Zhang was already in full swing, against a superior number of spirits. The possessed school employee, after an unsuccessful attack with a box, goes into a frontal attack. But the Taoist magician decides to use another of his truth spells, summoning a powerful man. The tall, stately figure of the Golden Spirit appears before Master Zhang and performs a sweeping strike in response to the blow of the possessed guard, creating an epic third-person view. As expected, the blow from the light entity turns out to be stronger than the blow from the leather puppet of darkness, and the infected employee is immediately knocked out. But the spirits entrenched in the depths of his body clearly do not intend to give up just like that, and the possessed man, grouped like a cat, lands on all four limbs. He again, making a powerful lunge, attacks the clot of solar energy in a furious but clumsy attack. Looking at what is happening from the outside, Zhang understands that ordinary physical attacks simply won't work. More effective techniques are needed. Therefore, the master decides to use another, more complex but therefore more suitable spell in this situation. Having dodged another blow from the possessed employee, the light essence moves behind him and fetters his movements, tightly grabbing his hands. Biting his finger, Zhang begins to write rows of magical symbols on many tablets, gradually creating a thickening solar aura around himself. As soon as everything is ready, the man waves his hand and directs tablets with magical symbols of expelling spirits, engulfed in a golden glow, at the infected person. Crashing and digging into the employee's body, they gradually knock out whole clots of dark energy, like from a punching bag. At one moment, the bulk of all energy bursts out of the body of the possessed person at once, like vomit. Eventually, the body of the guard is completely freed from the shackles of darkness, becoming a completely empty shell. Suddenly, the doors of the theater hall burst open, and along with the rays of moonlight, Yelan bursts into the hall, shouting a warning to Zhang so that he would not allow him to touch these evil spirits under any circumstances. And then, as if by order, the entire mass of parasitic entities previously joyfully sitting in the theater rows rushes towards Zhang in one large wave. But without losing the situation out of control, the Taoist magician protects himself with a barrier of solar breath. But even so, it is unlikely that he will be able to contain all this darkness. The barrier gradually begins to crack under the terrifying pressure. It seems that this time the energy of light will not save its summoner. All the spirits attack Zhang at once, turning him into their next puppet. Now Yelan faced perhaps one of the most dangerous enemies for him, because this opponent combined all the power of hundreds of tormented souls and the skill and spiritual power of a Taoist magician. Deftly leaping across the theater rows, the possessed Zhang pounces on the fleeing Yelan. Deftly jumping over a few more rows, the Taoist magician finds himself right in front of the main character, who is taken by surprise. The situation becomes more tense and dangerous with each passing moment. But Yelan deftly jumps to the side and swings for a slashing blow at his opponent, a powerful blow to the neck with the edge of the palm. Although it turns out to be quite strong, however, this does not help the situation in any way. On the contrary, now Yelan finds himself open to a retaliatory strike, which the possessed Zhang takes advantage of, performing an even more powerful side blow to our hero's stomach. From a blow of such power, Yelan is slammed into the wall, after which he falls to his knees in front of his former comrade in misfortune. This is not for you to throw ordinary school children around. At some point, the possessed Zhang, or rather the spirits inside him, try to read one of his spells, but together with coherent words, only incoherent nonsense is uttered, like youth rap. Not intending to participate in an impromptu rap battle and taking advantage of the opportune moment, Yelan angrily delivered a powerful blow directly to Zhang's face. It would seem that a blow of such force should knock him out on the spot, but as befits a worthy professional, he has decent physical fitness. In many ways superior to the training of any high school student. Zhang, like the damn Flash, attacks Yelan with a running start, as if he didn't feel the previous blow. But our hero grabs one of his hands in time, and with a powerful jerk throws the possessed specialist over himself. But Zhang, without missing a beat, pushes away from Yelan's back, breaking out of the grip and pushing the young man to the side, knocking him down. Yelan, joining his hands in a lock, again tries to counterattack, but the result is quite expected. But Zhang easily throws the young man away with one kick, thereby not allowing him to even inflict a scratch on him. Yelan falls to the ground and Zhang once again raises his hand for another blow. It seems that this fight will be endless, but the main character repels the impending blow with a kick, at the same time jumping up on his hands from the ground, and again preparing to take on the next blows of the enemy. After which, immediately jumping to his feet, he delivers another powerful blow to Zhang's stomach, followed by a response. For some time, they continue to fight almost on equal terms. One blow is followed by a response, and each clearly did not want to give up their advantages. This continues until Zhang performs a powerful sidekick that sends Yelan flying across the entire theater hall. An obsessed detective attacks the exhausted protagonist. It would seem that this could be the end, but at one moment, everything breaks off. Sun Mao himself appears from the darkness of the hall, ordering his servant to stop beating the young man. It seems that our quiet man has some other plans for Yelan. He stands right in front of our hero and utters a classic villain line in the spirit of Urgo from the League of Legends. You certainly don't need to go through such suffering. Towering gloatingly over the defeated hero, Sun Mao tells him that surely powerful people like him do not always have to endure such pain. After all, no matter how you look at it, Yelan did not tolerate it. Oh, that is, he is not like Sun Mao, and our hero never had to endure all these insults and bullying from everyone around him. But the main character is not going to despair and, in his classic way, jokingly says that he is not touched by the words of an offended schoolboy, no matter how touching they may be. But this only angers Sun Mao even more, and with an even greater surge of rage, he begins to reveal the full essence of his own suffering. No one except him had to be forced to eat cigarette butts, simultaneously insulting him in every possible way and spreading shameful rumors around the school. No one pulled his pants off without forcing him to crawl on all fours and beat him, recording all this on video. After all the suffering, Sun Mao was humiliated and slandered, which is why he failed to find more than one friend in this school. Even with all the pain that Yelan experienced, he is not able to imagine the whole true essence of the pain, and with it, and his plan. Sun Mao says that all these so-called ghost spirits are just beings who want to gain consolation from the pain of others. But Yelan responds by saying that people like him reveling in their own grief, are excellent company for all these otherworldly creatures. Continuing his words, Yelan says that even with all that newfound power, Sun Mao will not become truly great and almighty. From these ridicules, Sun Mao, truly distraught, calls upon all his dark energy and prepares to take out all his unquenchable anger on the mocking Yelan. Clots of dark purple energy, like tentacles, rush towards the main character, wanting to profit from his little soul. It seems that some very funny anime with tentacles is about to begin, but suddenly everything stops. It turns out that Master Zhang managed to free himself from the influence of the ghosts, and took advantage of the moment to cover almost the entire back of Sun Mao with cleansing seals. After all the seals are attached to the target, the only thing left for our detective to do is to activate them with just a couple of hand movements, starting his exorcism session. Yelan gets up from the floor and, as if nothing had happened, stretches his hands. It turns out that from the very beginning it was his cunning multi-move. The only thing that slowed down this plan was excessive artistry on Zhang's part. In response to all Yelan's words, the specialist says that he guessed that the main puppeteer of all these perfumes would want it in his collection. The only thing left to do was wait for the right moment. Next, Zhang simply begins to brag about his skills. It turns out that the whole point of these card tricks is to use the semi-penetration method. This method involves laying 2 sheets or more sheets of paper on top of each other, and then inscribing special characters in ink. The ink is absorbed and the second sheet has a similar transcript, thus achieving greater efficiency without extra effort. And from the very beginning, it turns out that Zhang deliberately pretended to be possessed in order to take advantage of Sun Mao's short-sightedness. And everything is purely in order to find out who controls all these puppets. Our Japanese Sherlock ends his explanations with this phrase. But at the same time, in his thoughts, Zhang understood that in fact, someone who controls the ghost would be able to use him as a vessel when all his spiritual energy had dried up. But he had no idea that there would be so many of them. At first, I even lost consciousness. When he first started fighting Yelan, he was completely under the influence of the spirits, and only during the further process did he manage to recover from the pain and the effects of 2 cleansing spells. The mixed martial arts that Zhang trained in were second only to the special skills of the highest category, and the physical strength in the context of cultivating spiritual energy greatly exceeded the strength of ordinary people. But Yelan withstood all the attacks as if nothing had happened. Further, Yelan still admits that from the very beginning he knew that Zhang was pretending to be possessed, so according to him, all this time he simply played along with him, he simply fought with half his strength. But Zhang quickly redirects the initiative to himself, saying that he guessed that Yelan was faking, and therefore used only 30% of his own strength. Then some kind of circus begins. Yelan and Zhang begin to compete in words, measuring their percentages of the forces used, although from the outside it looked more like 2 merchants bidding on a market with junk. In the end, the main character says that he simply wears an amulet that blocks part of his powers. Otherwise, according to his words, he would easily smash everything here to pieces. But at the same moment, Zhang guesses the name of this amulet, thereby letting him know that he is in complete control of the situation. This confuses Yelan, and for some time, he does not know how to answer his comrade on the case. But then after a moment, there is no longer any time for this. Suddenly, Zhang almost falls off his feet, clutching his head and leaning on a nearby desk. But according to the specialist himself, this is nothing more than a headache from the terrifying thought of the volume of text that he will have to write in the future. But suddenly our hero's eyes begin to darken, and his thoughts become confused. It seems that the long-term influence of otherworldly energy has not passed without a trace. Yelan falls to the floor, helpless. It seems that this time his condition is worse than before. Looking to the side, Zhang sees that all the magical purification seals are falling off Sun Mao's back. And at this very moment, Zhang realizes that the situation is really getting worse and worse. A sharp impulse of dark energy throws the specialist aside, slamming him into the wall of the hall. It seems this time his forces have only multiplied several times. Sun Mao, or rather what was left of him, absorbing more and more dark energy from the darkness, says that he did not expect such short-sightedness from Zhang. Noticing that it was he who was the worst of all his predecessors, suddenly the image of the quiet man changes significantly. His limbs and whole body become longer. The ends of his fingers turn into sharp claws, and his face almost completely loses any human features. Now Sun Mao looked more like a cross between Slenderman and SCP-Modest. Lying on the floor and realizing that the situation has taken on the worst possible scenario, Zhang, with the last of his strength, asks the question of the essence, what he is. Rising on stage, Sun Mao says that he already clearly guessed that humanity was doomed, especially with such insignificant defenders as him, pointing to Zhang. After which, the newly transformed monster jumps off the stage and attacks its only spectator, Master Zhang. Grabbing the detective's hand, the entity begins to say that many are ready to do dirty work, but not many know that they are mostly brainless. The spirits do not know the limits of their hunger, until their bearer grows old and the spirits devour his body and the remains of his soul. The demon says that having absorbed one, the ghosts will go in search of another, and so on at the end of the entire cycle. There is almost nothing human left except an irresistible hunger and thirst for suffering. And until there was only one single strongest spirit left, the gloomy essence continued to loom over Zhang, ominously continuing to tell the whole essence of the nature of darkness and parasitic spirits. A moment later, his speech becomes even more insane, and this time he begins to say that more than hundreds of years have passed since the time of Zhengde. The Taoist monks even then had no idea how strong a certain mother had become. Rising from the floor, Zhang tells the dark entity that it was Sun Mao who became the original owner, whom he was the first to find. Distracted from his ravings, the monster casts a fleeting glance at the specialist, saying that this boy's shell will also do. Turning away from his interlocutor, the entity jumps back onto the theater stage, saying that the spiritual power of its carrier is most suitable, matching the energy of an adult, thanks to which it will be easier for him to learn the values of this era, and then easily join the society of the school in order to suck out their souls. Grabbing the unconscious Yelan's head with its clawed paw, the monster says that he originally wanted to use this stronger shell, and only now he had such a good opportunity to realize the original point of his plan. Compared to the spirits of a common man or any other depleted soul, his body can bring much more benefit. Even at their first meeting, he guessed about this, but after seeing everything that happened, he imagined everything in all its colors and possibilities. Now the only thing he needs to do is to absorb the spirit that was sitting in Yelan's body, and then, in this era of insignificant Taoists, continue to absorb every person who has a worthwhile spiritual power. But suddenly a light laugh comes from the lifeless body of the main character. Looking out from under Yelan's clawed palm, he said mockingly that he couldn't help but laugh from all the laughter he said. Yelan compares all this to a certain mobile game, where in order to exceed the limit of allowed cards you need to spend all available ones, and only the presence of 2 tigers in the first stages of the game will help to somehow break the system. However, the demon clearly did not appreciate this joke, and with a new surge of rage he began to carry out the first stage of his plan. He calls all the other ghosts to himself, concentrating all his power around himself. After several years of spiritual restoration, the vast majority of the emergency incidents registered by the Specialized Executive Office were classified as yellow or lower. Previously, there was absolutely no mention of a monster of this rank. I am afraid that only the Chief Master can cope with spirits of this rank, which has absorbed the spiritual energy of hundreds of students. The completely possessed Sun Mao continued a meaningless argument with the awakened Yelan. Our hero continues to talk about the insignificance of the shell of the essence, and that even having acquired the full power of hundreds of souls, he remains the same as all the other parasites. And then Yelan's inner voice enters the conversation, followed by mystical tattoos appearing on the main character's face. It looks like someone is about to get ripped off. The entire face of the main character, starting from his neck, begins to be covered with mystical tattoos. All the inner power is about to burst out. The monster feels a sharp heat followed by a large burning sensation emanating from Yelan's flushed face. The entity throws our hero aside, realizing where everything is going. After which, using his power, he forms a powerful magical field, attracting theater seats and forming one huge ball of energy and metal. Dozens of chairs rush towards Yelan like so many improvised projectiles. A pile of broken chairs buries the main character, and now the demon can only hope that such a primitive physical attack was enough to finish off Yelan. Since the time when the entity in the body of Sun Mao became a spirit under a tiger, he has not felt such pain. The last time was when he had his own bodily shell and was bitten by a tiger. And since then, more than hundreds of years have passed, before even attacks Taoists felt like mosquito bites. But not this time. Now he feels the same pain, real and comprehensive as in the past. Suddenly, a blinding light begins to emanate from under the pile of chairs, along with a crackling sound like the sound of a fire burning. Together with a powerful wave of light and fire, a pile of debris scatters in all directions, dispelling the surrounding darkness. And in the same moment of confusion of the demon, Yelan's flaming figure attacked, but this time he did not look like himself, taking on a more supernatural appearance, from which he emanated power. A powerful blow, raising whole clouds of dust around itself, throws the demon away, sending him into a short flight across the floor of the hall. Yelan finally takes on his true form, the appearance of an ugly and fearsome mythical demon. Now his face was covered by the same mask that, many years ago, he found in that package. Now nothing, not even his shackles of flesh and blood, was able to contain all the power that was concentrated in his body. He says that throwing stools was a bad idea on Sun Mao's part from the very beginning, especially since he had more advanced pain-inflicting skills. The demon sees in front of him no longer that harmless at first glance high school student, but the demon devourer himself. And even though only part of his body was covered with aura, he nevertheless looked quite ominous. The dark demon, even at the sight of such a dangerous opponent, does not lose confidence and says that no matter what kind of creature he is, in any case he will become his dinner. After all, he has already absorbed the spiritual energy of hundreds of people. Fully confident of his victory, the demon-possessed Sun Mao attacks the wearer of the mask, intending to break his spiritual potential. But his blow is effectively blocked by Yelan. It seems that someone clearly underestimated their opponent, and now each of them is at the peak of their capabilities, can demonstrate all their capabilities in their true guises. The demon devourer clearly understood that in front of him was just a clown jumping back and forth, nothing more, and in any case, no matter how many souls he absorbed, this purple boy would never be his equal. Not intending to wait long, he makes a powerful blow right on the demon's distorted face, sending him crashing into the next wall of the theater hall. It seems that when all this is over, someone will have to compensate for all the damage for a long time. Zhong watched this action from the side, realizing that when Yelan spoke about 30% of his strength, he was clearly not lying. Remembering his words when they were in the schoolyard, our specialist understands that this boy definitely had a plan B. One would think that he just blurted it out. But as it turned out, everything was not so simple. Zhong understands that perhaps if he had not attracted the attention of all these spirits, Yelan would have dealt with all the problems here long ago. Here she is that very demonic form, and the very culprit of all the past mysterious events. Who would have thought that our detective would be able to solve this case so accurately, and especially in such circumstances? It's scary to imagine how much text it would take to report on these events, an entire novel not otherwise. The demon in Sun Mao begins to absorb even more dark energy, transforming his feeble, even less human-like body into something more terrifying than before. Now in front of Yelan was not just a possessed puppet, but darkness itself in the flesh, taking the form of a huge demonic beast. The wounded Zhang tries to warn the protagonist, telling him that his opponent is deliberately sacrificing speed in order to strengthen his blow and body weight. But it seems that Yelan and the demon eater inside him already know what to do, and taking a fighting stance, enveloping themselves in a fiery aura, they were ready to take any blow. When the right moment comes, Yelan, easily concentrating all his energy, simply knocks Sun Mao's body out of the monstrous clod of dark energy, thereby depriving the parasitic demon of its shell. Grabbing the boy's clothes, our hero begins to pull his body out of the dissipating darkness with all his might, preventing the demon or any other parasitic spirit from possessing him again. But he is prevented from doing this by the newly condensed energy, which returns to its former demonic appearance. Even after all the most powerful blows, the parasitic demon remains too strong. Having regained a more or less complete form, the demon tries to escape, realizing that Yelan, along with the essence of his mask, is too strong. But the fiery aura that enveloped his body did not allow him to escape far, because with every second, the burning pain became stronger and stronger, hindering his movements and causing excessive suffering that could saturate hundreds of similar parasitic spirits. In the end, the demon falls to the floor, writhing from side to side in pain. It was as if he was trying to knock the fire out of his body, but it seems that this only made the flame gain more strength. Over time, the sparks of the magical flame subside, and the demon manages to rise from the ground, seeing his rival, or rather tormentor, in front of him. Yelan heads towards the demon, with a confident gait in the spirit of JoJo, approaching closer and closer to the clod of tormented souls. But immediately, once again gathering his strength, the demon, like a tiger lurking in ambush, takes a jumping position to prevent another attack from the devourer. But Yelan strikes first, thereby preventing his opponent from even blocking this attack. This powerful blow creates a powerful burst of energy, which is visible many meters from the stage itself, even through the fog of dust rising from everywhere. Suddenly, Zhang feels a strange otherworldly presence around him, but he already guessed the source of this strange aura. Suddenly, right in front of him, as if from the textures, Yelan himself appears in his signature demonic mask, and everything is just like in those visions from the previous incident. Moving away from the unexpected screamer, Zhang decides that while they have dealt with one problem, they also need to deal with that magical barrier outside the school. The spirits use the devil drives in circles tactics to confuse and drive the victim into a corner, and the strongest and perhaps temporarily defeated spirit, among others, is more knowledgeable in this matter than anyone else. It seems that this was all one big scam. The parasitic demon simply pretended that he was going to fight Yelan, but it was all just a diversion. It seems that he simply ran away. While Mr. Zhang continued to lecture his pseudo-advisor, Yelan immediately got down to business, deciding to literally feel the barrier of dark energy surrounding them both. His hand easily passes through the barrier, but immediately after a moment, the entire dome of violet glow seems to evaporate, and with it all the rest of the darkness remaining after the presence of hundreds of spirits. Yelan quickly realizes that there is some kind of pattern in all this. All that remains is to determine the operating principle itself. Zhang assumes that somewhere there must be the core itself, the epicenter of all energy. But looking for it now is like trying to open a combination lock by guessing, unless, of course, one of them both had the necessary technology. At the same time, Zhang says that even selecting the required number on a combination lock can take more than 100,000 different combinations, but it is definitely not possible to do this one at a time. But still, he admits that even if Zhang is not a supporter of such radical methods, but if they want to get out of this place, they should trust a professional. While Zhang begins to do his own tricky calculations, Yelan immediately decides to take action, mentioning those same 100,000 different attempts at combinations. At this moment, a logical but even more delusional thought comes into our hero's head. It looks like he will have to try his luck 100,000 times in a row. But Zhang doubts his thoughts, saying that this is just one of the simplest examples that is most suitable in this situation. But the young man clearly does not intend to listen to his tediousness, instantly jumping off and starting to complete the very first attempt. He begins to run around the entire territory of the hall in search of the limits of the barrier or any other spatial distortions. From the outside, it begins to look more like a lot of fireballs rushing back and forth, rather than a planned plan of squeaks. It seems that for the most part, Yelan does not think with his head, and he immediately starts everything with improvisation, unlike the calculating Zhang. "I just want to ask if he's an idiot," the specialist thought in his thoughts. But at this speed, it's unlikely that Yelan would have heard anything. And in principle, a person with such diverse capabilities clearly should not be contradicted. But perhaps after some time of this running around, he will be able to find a way out of the situation. But for that, our detective has practically nothing to do. After many runs, Yelan finally rushes to the upper main exit. If this is not a way out of this problem, then the search may drag on for another hour or even days. Having opened the thick, creaking metal doors, Yelan still manages to find the only way out of this spatial anomaly. It seems that the plan for selecting combinations is working after all. Meanwhile, in the school's sports yard, a completely wounded monster was slowly hobbling away from the walls of this damned school. His entire already disfigured body was covered with bleeding wounds, from which almost instantaneous regeneration or the possibility of dark magic could not even save him. Who would have thought that the main culprit in all these injuries would be some random little guy, along with his pocket demon in a mask? If only a little more power, the Demon Eater would have completely dispelled his gloomy soul, then even the most miraculous means or any other mania would not have helped. Suddenly, extraneous words from a certain bird sitting on one of the nearby basketball hoops interfere with the conversation of his thoughts. The possessed birdie begins to reproach the monster for his decision. How is it possible to first get a sufficient amount of energy using the local spirits and spiritual power, hundreds of school children, and at the most crucial moment give in? In his thoughts, the demon says that initially he did not intend to do all this at once, but the inexplicable obsession of this Sun Mao at some point took over. Initially, he should not have shown such lust for the creature that sat in the depths of that schoolboy. And in general, these practitioners and specialists are much more capable than his current interlocutor described them, especially the one who handled fire, and in any case, the job is done, and there is nothing more to talk about. However, the demonic bird, unnaturally tilting its head to the side, calls it a shame, and reminding that if this action somehow affects the plans of their master, then he will probably guess what it will all lead to. In his defense, the monster says that those two are still in his trap, so the matter remains small, after which it is fashionable to calmly leave the crime scene, but his excuses are abruptly interrupted by extraneous noise. But suddenly, from the doors at the entrance to the gym, a dull noise is heard spreading through the empty corridors of the school. The mystical talking bird instantly flies away from the place, not wanting to deal with all this fuss. Next, the monster turns its attention to the student's body lying not far from it. but he is prevented from using it in any way by Yelan, who appeared out of nowhere and yet escaped from the spatial trap. He slowly descended from the main staircase, intending to put an end to the fight against this monstrous creature. The main character comes as close as possible to the demon and enters into dialogue with him, realizing that his prey will now never escape the hunter. Confused, the monster asks the boy how he managed to escape from the magical field, and not through one insignificant field, but through as many as 30,000 barriers that are simply physically impossible to overcome in such a short time. The dark demon from below looked at Yelan towering above him, and realizing that in front of him was not some pathetic soul of an ordinary soul, but a real powerful entity, perhaps the most dangerous of all the others he had ever met. In response, Yelan says that no barrier or magic field can stop him so easily and force him to surrender. However, his pathetic speech is abruptly interrupted by the inner voice of the demon devourer. He says in the young man's thoughts that he feels the breath of death, an absolutely identical trace of a dark aura similar to what he felt 3 years ago, focusing the young man's attention on the ring where that demonic bird was sitting. From the very beginning, it seemed strange, even if the strongest spirit is able to control the rest of the lower spirits. But he is not able to collect such a large number in one place. Even he cannot do it. Behind this entity is someone else, some outside force, some more powerful ruler. In any case, this is an excellent catch. It is not every day that you come across such a large fish. Realizing that his depleted strength is not enough, the demon tries to escape, but he still does not know that more than one spirit has ever escaped from Liang. But suddenly his legs begin to tangle, either from weakness or from a surge of adrenaline. In any case, now he definitely won't run far. The demon, like a clumsy drunkard, plops down on the ground. Having lost his former agility and jumping ability, now his movements were more inhibited and jerky, like those of a shot necromorph from Dead Space. Taking advantage of the moment, Yelan, like a tiger hidden in the bushes, pounces on his defenseless prey, finally planning to finish off one of the puppets of darkness. The demon begins to scream heart-rendingly from just Yelan's touch, feeling that unbearable burning pain and fiery aura. With a powerful jerk, the main character presses the lanky golem to the ground, not giving him a chance to rise from the ground. Yelan placed his foot on the head of the defeated enemy, like any hunters taking photos with their prey, after which the demon eater asks the parasitic entity what he can know about Fanlan, the spirit of mountains, forests, trees, and rocks. Then the events are abruptly transferred to the roof of one of the skyscrapers in the city of Kandy, whose gloomy and seemingly dead panorama of multi-story high-rises was saturated with something gloomy and ominous, as if all the darkness was concentrated in one city, in anticipation of what was to come. Our old friend Shunjiadi stood at the very edge of the roof, watching from the side a huge surge of dark negative energy. In his hands he held a Taoist compass, somehow reacting to particularly bright bursts of this or that energy, like some kind of magic locator. The previously familiar red-haired girl appears behind him, ordering him not to move. She announces that Sunde is accused of suspected crimes related to the illegal use of special abilities, as well as obstructing government officials in the performance of their duties. The girl puts her hand on the handle of her suitcase with luggage, reminding the accused that when she takes on the task, there is no need to do unnecessary tricks. But Zunde, in response to this, only smiles maliciously. These accusations simply make him laugh. But the girl, screaming on the floor, tells the man that it was he who awakened and sent hundreds of dark souls to the school, during which innocent children suffered. But it seems that Shunde was still confident in his innocence. He says that the revival of spirits will bring much more change to this world than just the Industrial Revolution or a bunch of injured school children, while specialized units are not even going to keep up with the times. All their methods are far from relevant, and now blaming him for hundreds of victims is the same as not distinguishing the main from the secondary. Afterwards, Jundi turns to his interlocutor and says, even if he really kills them all, what can the government do about it? Next, the old man starts a long speech about how he spent his whole life studying the secret techniques of feng shui, and in the course of his research, he understands that people with special abilities, but leading an ordinary way of life, have no future. That is why, according to Shunde, he is going to change everything no matter how. Realizing that ordinary words cannot solve this matter, the girl decides to resort to a more traumatic method. With all her might, not without the help of magic, of course, she throws her luggage at the accused. But unexpectedly, some blue energy stops the flying suitcase, after which a third voice intervenes in the dialogue. A stranger who suddenly appeared not far from both of them said that Mr. Sun's technique is of exceptional value to us. The tall stranger introduces himself as a specialist Fuju. It is strange that before this, none of those present had even felt his presence. Realizing that in this case even violence will not help in solving the problem, she returns her luggage to herself, expecting further continuation of negotiations. Fuju sharply, but at the same time quite politely, interrupts their argument and says that it will be quite difficult to carry out what they have planned, after which he says that it is time for them to leave. By placing 2 fingers to his lips, he creates a piercing whistle, as if calling someone or something to him. The outline of a huge raven emitting a purple glow from itself appears in the sky. Now it is obvious who he was calling. A huge bird swoops towards the edge of the skyscraper roof, landing right next to Fuju and Shunde. They both grab the paws of a huge bird, like hobbits on giant eagles. And finally, Fuju says that despite the fact that those parasitic spirits did not wiggle the students' bodies for long, and did not cause any particular harm to anyone, it seems that this time things are more complicated. Both men fly into the air, promptly advising the girl to hurry if she is truly concerned about the well-being of her employees, after which they bid Miss Lin farewell. Events are again transferred back to the school sports courtyard, where Yelan continued to literally put pressure on the demon, trying to find out from him everything valuable that he knows. The completely exhausted monster says that he has already said everything he knows, especially since he can know, an ordinary pawn, about such a powerful being as Fang Lan. Yelan stops the interrogation and returns to a more important matter, remembering Zhang, who at that time was still tinkering with this magical field. The demon, after all the torture he endured, asks Yelan to take revenge on him, but our hero is in no hurry to answer. Instead of just letting him go, the young man grabs the demon's face and says that in any case, whether the information he said was true or false, it would be unreasonable to let him go. Therefore, Yelan decides that he is better off dead, after which he reveals his true demonic form before devouring the next ghost. An insignificant monster squeals in horror, realizing that now it is not his strength that will save him, nor his tricks that will save him from the immense hunger of the demon eater. After this, dark energy, like a cork in a barrel, bursts out of Sun Mao's long-suffering body. This returns the boy to his former appearance. It seems that this was the most terrible suffering that this poor fellow has ever had to endure. Having come to his senses, Sun Mao screams in horror seeing Yelan's terrifying appearance in front of him. The demonic mask disappears from the protagonist's face, and Sun Mao recognizes him as an acquaintance. Sun Mao realizes his mistake, and with tears in his eyes understands what this whole nightmare has led or could have led to. The young man understands that Yelan will most likely have to kill him in order to finally get rid of him. But Yelan does not allow him to finish his repentance, directing a stream of fiery cleansing energy at him. Events are again transferred to the entrance to the high school, where Miss Lin was already standing. With the help of her magical skills, she easily passes through the barrier, going inside the schoolyard. The situation turns out to be much worse than she could have imagined. Now the school looked more like a huge ghost house, with walls blackened by dark energy and empty corridors. Miss Lin immediately comes to the sports field, where many exhausted students were still lying, looking more like empty leather shells. Among all the bodies, she finds Sun Mao's body, but even now, when his spiritual energy is completely depleted, she sensed something special about his spiritual potential. Suddenly, behind her, the doors to the school swing open with a loud noise, and Mr. Zhang appears in the opening. He says that he heard terrifying screams from the street, and at one moment he sees his old friend. Zhong initially refers to Lin as her boss, but she asks not to be called that, since such treatment makes her look very old. She asks her colleague what happened here. In response, Ju begins to talk about everything that happened here. But unexpectedly, something makes him stop his story, as if something had suddenly changed around him. Zhang feels that there is no longer that negative energy from Sun Mao around, but Yelan also disappeared with it. The specialist even suggests that that spirit still managed to take over his body. Looking to the side, he sees a young man lying unconscious on the cold concrete floor of the site, clearly not a good place to rest. Zhong immediately tries to wake up Yelan, but at first he does not respond to touches. But Yelan still opens his eyes, but at the same time without saying anything, and does not try to get up from the cold floor. Miss Lin asks what's wrong with him, but Zhang understands that he cannot fully reveal all the cards about his comrade. He can say with confidence that Yelan is the owner of the guise of a demon, but if he tells Ling Sinan about this, then the boy will no longer be able to hide this fact and live in peace. On the other hand, Yelan saved his life, and judging by his behavior, he is trying his best to avoid meeting with government employees. Moreover, this caused a lot of noise, but this is also Zhang's fault, because it was he who decided to come here. Miss Lin asks another question, wanting to know exactly what happened here. Zhang says that Yelan is an ordinary student who accidentally fell out of the window. Fortunately, there were no injuries. Yelan at this time gestures to praise Zhang for his artistry and for helping the young man hide his real name. The next morning, a huge number of cars with government and first aid workers arrive at the school, at the scene of the incident. A bunch of people in orange suits, like after a nuclear power plant accident, rush around the territory, carrying many injured students on stretchers. Lin Sinan, calmly twirling the key fob on his finger, reports on the phone to his superiors, telling the whole essence of what happened. As soon as the investigations figure everything out, they will publish news about the gas leak to cover up the true problem of the incident that occurred. But even the government administration is not omnipotent, and in any case, there will be rumors around this story. Anyway, as long as parents keep in touch with their children, there is nothing to worry about. Only some of the victims are in good health and should wake up soon, but this is not a problem. Suddenly, she interrupts the report, intending to deviate slightly from the main topic of conversation. The girl talks about Fuju, who, as it turns out, is quite knowledgeable about her abilities, although even in many specialized units, people are not so thoroughly informed, except perhaps Mr. Sunjia. Her telephone interlocutor, who turns out to be the president of the National Emergency Management Agency, Ji Haokyang, nods understandingly and then hangs up, ending their conversation. At the entrance to the school, Mr. Zhang says goodbye to Yelan, allowing him to simply leave unless, of course, next time they will not bump into each other again. Now they are even. Our hero does not act so kindly and simply. He is about to leave, wanting to forget about what happened like a bad dream. But Zhang abruptly stops the guy out of curiosity, asking him about that demonic mask, the mask of a spirit caster. At first, Yelan does not want to listen to the specialist, but still tries to tell everything in general terms in simple words. Legend has it that one man, called a spirit exorcist, created 12 masks, each of which contained an extremely dangerous spirit. And today, quite by chance, he happened to meet one of the owners of these masks, Zhang said, thereby hinting about Yelan. But does the young man know which one of these damn dozen he got? Yelan simply speculates that it could be Bo Chi, one of the divine beings who performed the Nuo ceremony to exorcise ghosts in ancient times. Hearing this further fuels Zhang's interest. The main character stops abruptly. Apparently someone is already tired of these constant questions and unnecessary pleasantries. Yelan says that there are too few people here who can hold him back, so it's better not to piss him off now. Zhang understands from his words that the guy does not want anything bad, but he is also a bully. The specialist explains that he did not want to hurt Yelan's thoughts in any way, saying that it would be somehow dangerous to let such a powerful creature go in all 4 directions. In order not to lose sight of the boy, Zhang suggests exchanging contacts with him in order to be in touch if something happens. After the past events, which were more like an episode from some Asian horror drama, the main character can finally calmly spend the rest of the day within the walls of his modest home. Now, being at home and relaxingly taking off his t-shirt, he is left alone with the voice of the mask, waiting for the rest of the day to continue.